I'm Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these. Hello. So we're here to continue our talk, multi-part series on modern Jews, people who are Jewish, because it can get kind of confusing. So the last time we talked about Ashkenazi Jews or the Ashkenazim, but another Jewish sect that we really need to give mention to are the Sephardic Jews. And so that's who we're going to talk about tonight. So first I want to say, Auntie, you're never late. You're here when you're supposed to be here. So thank you for being here. And just so that I don't have to do it later, I'm going to play my little Jewish disclaimer so that we can get that out of the way. It is not anti-Semitic to point out that certain elites throughout history, including the Khazar ruling class, have strategically adopted Judaism not as a matter of faith, but as a tool for political sovereignty, identity control, and economic insulation. Just as the Vatican weaponized Christianity to justify imperial expansion and the British Crown cloaked colonization in divine monarchy, some elite families used Jewish identity not to elevate a people, but to shield their own power. Critiquing those historical power moves is not a hatred of Jews. It is a rejection of using any religion, Judaism included, as a camouflage for conquest, manipulation, and unearned legitimacy. If you can call out papal tyranny without being anti-Christian or condemn Western colonialism without being anti-European, then you can damn well expose elite identity fraud without being anti-Semitic. The real anti-Semitism is pretending all Jewish people share the guilt of a few who turned sacred identity into a political weapon. There's my disclaimer. All right, so we got that out of the way, thankfully. So Adrian is here with us again tonight to finish out this 3B to talk about the Sephardim, because we got to mention them before we go into the big show. And the point of all of these shows to talk about the missing Hebrews. So I'm going to bring Adrian up. Hello, Adrian.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. So before we get started, I'm going to do a quick review. And during our last show, Neanderthals were brought up, and I didn't go into Neanderthals during that one. So during this review of how we've gotten to this point up to the Sephardim, I'm going to add that in. So I'm going to do this review real quick. If I miss something, please shout it out for me. Okay, so last time we talked about the specific Ashkenazi Jewish and their homeland, right? So we're going to get into that. But I'm going to start with the Neanderthals because the Neanderthals start in those same exact areas. Okay, so Neanderthals first appear in fossil records in Europe and Western Asia. The earliest remains associated with Neanderthals are found dating back to 430 years ago. These fossils are found at Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, in Atapuerca, Spain. So that'll kind of get into the Sephardic that we talk about. These fossils show a transition or some transitional features between Homo heidelbergensis and later Neanderthals, suggesting either that Neanderthals evolved out of the Homo heidelbergensis populations that were in Europe, or they did mix with the Homo heidelbergensis populations, at least somewhat, because they didn't like to mix. So we have to remember Neanderthals evolved primarily in Europe, not in Africa. They are the one hominid that spawned somewhere else. But their range extended from Western Europe in Spain, France, and Germany area through Eastern Europe and into Western and Central Asia, reaching as far as Siberia and into the Middle East. This is a huge swath of land. So we have evidence from Spain that I talked about 430,000 years ago. And then in Croatia, which we were talking about Kiev, right? 120,000 years ago. And Feldhofer Cave in Germany, 40,000 years ago. So we can see where those hotbeds are, where we see people with Neanderthal DNA there today. So in the Kiev region, though specifically, archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals occupied areas around the Dnieper River basin, which is, we kept talking about that area last time.
Yeah, I think you have a problem with pronouncing that name.
I do. I still do. I'm going to call it Dnieper. Somebody can fix it for me.
I like it. It's fine.
Okay. Excavations near Kiev and further east in Ukraine have revealed Masterian tools. These are stone tools associated with Neanderthals. Some caves and open-air sites in central and eastern Ukraine hold evidence of Neanderthal hunting camps with butchered animal bones and those same stone tools, but also the stone tool workshops where they made them. These are all the same areas that have documented Khazarian Jewish populations. So when we look at Crimea and southern Ukraine, Crimea is one of the richest Neanderthal regions in Eastern Europe. Sites like Kijikakoba Cave and Starosili contain Neanderthal fossils and tools dating from 100,000 to 40,000 years ago. Good. So that places Ukraine as the frontier zone of Neanderthal Europe and the Denisovan and other hominids that were in other areas, especially in Asia. So Kiev sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, which is why it's, was all about trade routes along the Dnieper, never going to say it right, which served as the north-south migration corridor right at Khazarian Empire. So the Neanderthal groups in Ukraine were influenced by both the European and the Eastern tool traditions. They brought those in. So Kiev really was their meeting point. The Khazarians, so we're way later, not way later, but we're later. The Khazarians made Judaism their state religion. And then when Khazaria started to fall, the Khazarian elites and royalty moved to the Rhineland, where there was already a Neanderthal hotbed, right? They would be welcomed, right? And then they mixed with other Jewish people, the nobility and the royals there. So I think we're caught up at this point. So now we're ready to talk about the Sephardic Jews.
The last 100,000 years in 5 minutes.
Right. Right. We're just going to break it all down. Right. And that's just, one strain of Neanderthals.
Right. I was going to say while you're taking a sip there, I wonder what there is to uncover from the other hominid groups outside of the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and the Homo sapiens.
Yeah, the Heidelbergensis, is one that it comes up here and there. Heidelbergensis did come out of Africa, but made a beeline to Europe. So, and then you have the other one. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. has a FL in it, but they're little tiny hominids, little
Yeah, I
tiny.
was thinking about those. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're probably, the reason why we have stories about gnomes and pixies and whatnot because they're little tiny. And then think about we have all these stories about giants, but if you're if as a full grown male, if you're 3 foot tall, then you come
Right.
across somebody who's 7.5 foot tall. That's a giant.
Yeah, when Webster meets Shaq, right? Yeah,
Right.
that.
Or
Got
Kevin Hart and Shaq, which we've seen pictures. You know what I
it.
mean? Shaq's a giant. So,
Yeah, he is.
he just is. So,
Hmm.
all right. So now we're ready to talk about the Sephardic. There really is only a couple of reasons to talk about the Sephardic. And the reason I say that is because today's modern Jews is estimated, they're 85% Ashkenazim. And so, Ashkenazi are who we're really looking at, and especially when we look at Israel, because these are Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah.
But it's not like the Sephardic were innocent. So we're going to have a quick intro because I'm going to do 100,000 years in 5 minutes again. So Spain, again, is one of the strongest Neanderthal heartlands in Europe. Atapuerca at Cima de los Huesos, right? We have those fossils that are 430,000 years old, right? And they have Neanderthal traits and pre-Neanderthal traits. So this is where they're coming out of, right? El Sidron Cave in the Asturias, there are remains of 13 Neanderthals from 49,000 years ago, right? We even have enough genetic material to say what their diet was, what their diseases were, and what their family groups were.
My goodness.
Then in Gibraltar, we know that name, right? In Gibraltar, right. Gorham's Cave holds some of the last surviving Neanderthal remains as recently as 28,000 years ago. So Spain was not just a Neanderthal home, but was one of the first and possibly their last refuge before their quote unquote extinction. Now we know that they interbred into other lineages, but the ones who did not kind of made their last stand in Spain.
Yeah,
And
I was
we
going to say
hear
I
this.
have a hard time with the word extinction when we're talking about Neanderthals because Marjorie Taylor Greene is still running around here, so
And
I
we
just
can,
have a real hard time with that.
right, we can still track their genetics, but
Right.
I think at some point, because I think the highest genetics is like 8%, I think at some point, a percentage gets far enough down and it's like, yeah, we're not doing that. But again, any percentages don't exist in Africa. People
Right.
of African descent do not have Neanderthal DNA.
Yeah,
These
MTG
are,
is like 28%.
she has to be, right? So, excuse me. Sepharad, which is the Hebrew word for Spain or Iberia interchangeably, is used in biblical and medieval texts. So it's used in a lot of texts, not just in Hebrew texts. So Sepharad is a known name for that area, right? So by Roman times, so that's in the first century, we're looking at 90, maybe the year 90, Jewish communities had established themselves in Hispania. So there were established Jewish communities early in Hispania. So we're going forward, after the 711 of the Common Era Moorish conquest, the Jewish culture flourished in Al-Andalus, which is what they call the Sephardic Golden Age. The Sephardim called Spain their fatherland until the 1492 Alhambra decree expelled them, and after.
So, Maggie, can you take a step back for a second?
Sure.
When you were talking about Hispania, initially when you first mentioned that, what years were you talking about that?
The first century.
Okay. Yeah, so this would have been after the expulsion of the Sephardic Jews from out of the the Roman Empire, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was about 70 AD, somewhere in that range. So it fits what you're talking about. Sorry.
Okay. So where these threads overlap, when we talk about genetics and me going 100,000 years in 5 minutes, the Iberian Peninsula was a Neanderthal homeland for 400,000 plus years. It's really hard to have a concept of that amount of time. When modern humans, so the Homo sapien, Homo sapien sapien, started coming to the area 42,000 years ago, right? And then created this admixture with the Neanderthals, right? But it left all the Neanderthal trace genetics, right? Modern Spaniards and Sephardic Jews who lived in Iberia for centuries carry around 4% Neanderthal DNA. So the DNA is there, right? Neanderthals kind of made their last stand in Gibraltar. And that's part of the mythology that we hear, right? Sephardic Jews made their European stand in Iberia until they were expelled in 1492. So they have this sort of shared motif as well. So the hidden sort of bloodlines in Jewish mysticism and the Kabbalah kind of speaks to the crypto Jews after 1492. So that may end up being another show because that's kind of mystic and woo-woo. That doesn't follow the genetic line very well.
You're saying the crypto Jews is kind of woo-woo?
Yeah, a little bit. When we talk about the Kabbalah, because that is standard Jewish mysticism. So Spain, Sepharad, is the Sephardic Jewish homeland. And the Sephardim themselves called it their fatherland. And you know me, I say all the time, people will tell you exactly who they are. Listen to them. I've said this about Hitler, who said he is a Neanderthal, and he was, and that the Aryans were Neanderthals. And once you can see it, you can't unsee it. Like, we have to listen to people when they tell you who they are. So the Sephardim themselves called Spain or Sepharad, that area, right? That's going to include Portugal and things like that, their fatherland. Those Jews lived in Iberia for well over a millennium, built a distinctive civilization there, had poetry, law, philosophy, synagogues, and they named the land Sepharad, right? That's a Hebrew word. It's a term that we see in the Old Testament, right? In the Bible. And because they were so well established, medieval writers of the time used that name for that area, Sepharad. So not just, religious people, but the people of the day who were writing.
Right.
So after the 1492 expulsion, the exiles carried a Judeo-Spanish language called Ladino, which is Latino. Interesting, huh?
It is. It is.
Right.
1492 was a 1492, 1493 was pretty interesting in that region. The the I guess the onset, if you will, or the reconquista, the takeover of the Christians. They were cleaning house. The what was it? The last Muslim area, Grenada, fell in 1493, and thus they just kind of cleaned house of the Jews and the Muslims all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a lot of geopolitical things going on around that time that it was all led by Christian colonialism.
Right.
So they carried this language called Ladino. This is where we get the term Latino, right? They kept all of their Iberian rituals. They also kept their surnames as they crossed the Mediterranean. And then for centuries, explicitly referred to Spain as their patria, which is their
Fatherland.
homeland or fatherland.
Hmm.
So modern Spain has repeatedly codified that special title in law. So Spain sees it too.
Mm.
So I'm going to make this case, but I know you have some very important things as we maybe as we get a little past 1492. So you've got some very important information, which is kind of the point of this show. So I'm going to make a few of these points and then I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
So we did talk, I'm going to make the case in 8 points. So number one, we already talked about it. Sepharad is Spain. Okay. It's the same language. And the Hebrew Bible in Obadiah 120 talks about Sepharad, and classic rabbinic commentators like Rashi identify it with Hispania. So Sephardim literally means the Jews of Spain and all their descendants, of course. So it's the same, it's a self name. It's not anything somebody later labeled them. They said it themselves. The other thing that we have going on that I hadn't mentioned yet, but you know where Neanderthals are, guess who else is there? The Goths, right? Because it was a rebrand.
Right.
So from Roman Visigothic times through the Al-Andalus and the Christian kingdom, so around, from those times, Jews in Spain produced some pretty hefty figures in what was going on. Hasdai ibn Shaprut in Cordoba's court, Judah ha-Levi and Ibn Gabaral, and these are all like intellectuals of the time, and they're firmly established there. This is an intellectual culture that they had going on and was part of the administration of the court. So it's not just an outpost or a place they were in ghettos or neighborhoods. This is their civilization center during
Right.
those times, from the Gothic times. So Spain also, so point number 3, Spain preserves all their medieval synagogues. So all the synagogues that were built by the Sephardic Jews are still preserved there. So we have El Trencido from the 14th century, Santa Maria la Blanca, and in Cordoba from 1315, and the entire Jewish quarters, which is called the Call of Garona. Those are all still taken well care of today. That's not just people traveling through or, being oppressed under this regime or whatever. This is the architecture of their homeland
Yeah.
community. So part 4 is the Ladino. It is the language, right? So after 1492, the Sephardim maintained the Castilian-derived Judeo-Spanish for their prayer, for their printing, for their journalism, for their ballads. So from Salonika to Istanbul and Morocco, this diasporic language that is literally Spanish mixed with Hebrew and Turkic and Greek. That is what that language is. It testifies to Spain as their cultural homeland, the Sephardic Jews. So now is where I'm going to hand it over to you because there's some pretty important information in our timeline. My next point starts the 1900s. So you're going
Okay.
to hit all of those, all that middle point. So I'm going to give that to you.
Well, going back to this idea of the Reconquista and the Inquisition and things like that, it was tough on those Sephardic Jews, because the Christians were coming online and you know, they were kicking butt and taking names, and you had a couple of choices. You either converted to Christianity, or you died in place or you left. And these men and women of the times, the Sephardic, were deeply involved in commerce, and when they were um, basically pushed out of Spain, some of them went on to seed areas like Brazil. They were in the Caribbean, and of course this is 1492, right? So what else is going on? Well, you got a pretty famous uh, or made famous Italian, going into those areas, and they were starting the sugarcane trade in Brazil, parts of the Caribbean, etc. And then you have the Sephardic Jews working on both the supply and plantation side of the transatlantic slave trade.
So this is where I don't mean to cut you off, but this
Go
is
ahead.
where you have people who talk about how the Jews were involved in the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just sort of this general catch-all of the Jews. But it's specific Jews. Not to say that the Ashkenazim were not involved. They were. But we're talking about Sephardic right now, and not only were they involved, they were very involved. So I
Well,
just
I
want
mean,
to
so
point
we're
that
we're
out
talking
for
about,
when.
yeah, we're talking about early Spain, 1492, and it was um, Ferdinand and Isabella who sent um, Christopher Columbus over. So I mean, you already have these folks who are you know really good at commerce. Why wouldn't they have been on on those uh, those ships too? And to your point, just the same way as a lot of Sephardic Jews are talking about they weren't involved in the Holocaust, then it probably stands to reason that a lot of Ashkenaz weren't involved um, uh, in the transatlantic slave trade, at least not early on, right? These are
Well, I
very
mean, in a
specific
different
areas and
way.
people. Yeah,
In a
exactly.
different way, because they intermixed with the money people and the royals and the nobles. And
Hmm.
so they benefited from the slave trade, but they weren't the ones, they weren't on the front lines, boots on the ground doing it, but definitely benefiting.
Yeah, they might have been on the financial side, instead of being on the plantation side, perhaps. But we can look into some of that. And oh, I was reading on one particular plantation that was roughly the size of Portugal, just one plantation.
And this was Sephardic Jews, that it was their plantation.
Correct. In the New World. So we're talking I think it was in Brazil, having one plantation the size of Portugal.
So
Can you
this is
imagine that?
one of several plantations.
Yeah, there was a bunch of plantations, but one in particular was particularly huge. um,
I couldn't
and
imagine how many enslaved people it would take to run a plantation the
oh my
size of
gosh,
Portugal.
I mean, it would be ridiculous in size. Ridiculous
Especially
in
during
size.
a time you don't have cars and stuff, like, to get on your
Right.
horse and go from one end to the other is gonna take
Well,
days and days and days.
Donkey and Company is very efficient.
They're so efficient. They can
So
get,
efficient.
but that's not till the 1800s when they can do everything immediately.
Right. And again, these expulsions were from 1492 in Spain, 1497 in Portugal. I mean, they were just right there on the leading edge of opening up the new world. They worked with Amsterdam and Dutch colonies in the 1600s, Dutch West India Company, um, again, my notes are talking about sugar cultivation in Dutch Brazil. They really kind of branched out and started working with, a lot of different countries who had interest in, the New World: Brazil, Jamaica, Barbados, Curacao, the Caribbean, just Suriname. They were just spread out everywhere, including um, outposts in Africa on the supply side.
Mm. So how's that?
Um, uh, they had some of the conversos in around 1497, uh, especially from the Portuguese side.
Hmm.
um, had gone to different areas in West Africa,
Hmm.
um, Angola, um, Sao Tome. These are areas that I don't even really know where that was, but it's just one that um, was in the list as I was making notes. Um, what's interesting is that if you start reading the history, it even starts mentioning some of the names of the families or the individuals who were involved in the trade. There's actual like manifests
So
and
they're not trying to
contracts.
hide it.
No, no. So this stuff is still recorded. Who the people were, where they went, what they did, when it happened. Um,
So these are
Manuel
the
Rod.
people who are directing also, because one of the things that I've talked about on this channel and you and I have talked about is, and that all the logs and the manifests will show, is that the people who were trafficking the humans
Hmm.
were going after specific humans. And so these are some of the people who are directing which humans to kidnap.
Yeah. One name that continues to pop up, Manuel Rodriguez Lamego.
Hmm.
This was in the 1600s, 1620s, 1630s. Um, he was a converso, so a he was a Sephardic Jew that converted to Christianity. I'm sure under duress.
Hmm.
Um, and my notes here are saying that he secured the contract from the Spanish crown to supply thousands of enslaved Africans to Spanish America. Right. And his headquarters were in Seville, but he had agents that operated on the African coast.
Wow. Wow. And that was one of the biggest reasons we're going to talk about this. We wanted to talk about the Sephardic Jews. The biggest issue I sort of think that we have right now with Zionistic Jewish people, um, these are Ashkenazim people. These are Ashkenazi Jews. It's difficult to find some of these other lesser sects, and I say lesser in number, not that they're less important, but lesser in number. They're smaller and have a lot less power. So while the Sephardic Jews don't seem to have power nowadays, it doesn't mean that they weren't huge players in things that shape our modern culture today.
Right.
And what's interesting is I don't remember if it was you or somebody else who was telling me that when Israel was given Israel, that they came in and were just given all kinds of grief to the Sephardic Jews that were there.
Yeah, to the ethnic Jews that were already in place, and so those ethnic Jews could have been Sephardic, but and we haven't talked about this, but also the Mizrahi.
So yeah, could have been.
Yeah, which I don't know near as much about, and quite honestly, it's really I don't know if you did or not, but it was kind of difficult to find some information on the Sephardic. I say kind of difficult, and I'm just comparing that to the Ashkenazim because they are the most prominent Jews, in number right now. So
Mhm.
most of the purview has to do with them.
Yeah, it is a little bit more difficult to find Sephardic stuff. It seems like I'm gonna put myself back up here. It seems like you can find it in the old writings, the old books, right? Like if you were to just do a Googler search or, try to find modern day articles, you may find things that say, like I said, the Jews were involved in the transatlantic slave trade, but it's not going to tell you that they also owned gigantic plantations and enslaved. Not only were they trafficking people, they also enslaved thousands upon thousands of people as well. It's not
Hmm.
going to tell you that stuff. You have to find it in these old, but like the one that's behind me, you have to find this stuff in these old writings, the old books where you can see the people who were there, their writings, what they saw, the firsthand account, what they described. Again, people are going to tell you things, believe them, right?
Right.
So that's also going to come into play when we talk about the missing Hebrews. We're going to talk a lot about what people actually said who were there, not what we're told today, because those can be two totally different things. But yeah, it's a little difficult to find that information on Sephardic Jews without going way back to medieval writings.
Well, and part of the difficulty for me, has to do with what you just mentioned. The hidden Hebrews, right? So some of these people are hidden in plain sight. When I see the name, Manuel and Rodriguez Lamigo, I'm not thinking of a Jewish man,
Mm-mm.
right? So it's hidden right there in the language, because in every way these people were Spanish,
Right, and they themselves said that is their homeland, that
right?
Spain is their homeland, which is kind of the point I'm making, the Ashkenaz, their homeland is Ukraine, it's
Hmm.
Kiev. The Kiev
Hmm.
is their capital, it's Ukraine, that's where they are from, and that is their homeland, and for the Sephardic, it is Spain,
Right.
and so neither one of those places are Palestine, or what is
Right.
now called Israel. Neither one of
Can't
them.
say that.
Oh, I'm gonna say it. I will refer to my, disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so, getting back to the pillars, number 5, okay? In Angel Pulido's 1905 collection of Sephardi letters, so these are the Sephardi letters, writers refer to Spain as Nuestra querida madre patria, which is our dear motherland, okay? That madre patria is motherland. That's their patria. So when they say just patria, it's homeland, okay?
Mm,
Right?
okay.
So, which is feminine. It's a feminine, right? Patria, but that's homeland. Madre patria is motherland. They also referred to it as the fatherland. So over and over again, they said it is their homeland. And this is where genetically they also were from, which is, what I talked about in the beginning. So Spain, for its part, as a government, explicitly addressed Jews as returning to, quote, their ancient fatherland. That is a quote from the government of Spain. And that was in 1881 telegram offering Jews asylum. And it wasn't just Sephardic, it was all Jews to return to their ancient fatherland.
Wow.
So everybody, there was a mutually acknowledged link there to Spain. So that framing persisted on and on and on. There is a 1929 film titled Los Judíos da Patria Española, which is Jews of the Spanish homeland. This is from 1929. So
Mm,
it's sort of like this is something everybody knows, we just don't talk about. So the 1492 sort of rupture didn't erase the fact that that's their homeland because those exiles kept all of those traditions, right? The Sephardim preserved Spanish liturgy, their Romance ballads, their Iberian customs for centuries. They had Ladino presses, their journalism. They had Ladino schools. They flourished across the entire Ottoman Empire, which was their memory of the Sepharad, right? Hi, Kareem. Hi, Vincent. Thanks for being here. Oh, he said the sports reporter Max Kellerman once said that his people are from Ukraine. Oh, sometimes they say this stuff out loud. All right. So, my point number 7. The 1924 royal decree opened a path to nationality for Sephardim, and a law numbered 122015 granted a broader right to citizenship to descendants of the expelled. This is that come home, right? We had the 1881, all Jews need to come home to their fatherland. Now we have 1924 saying if you're a Jew and you're Sephardic, you can be a citizen, right? These illegal acts were premised on the idea that the Sephardim are children of the Sepharad of Spain. And then my 8th point, and the biggest one of all, when a people self-name, we listen, right? Their premier language is Judeo-Spanish. They have canonical memories built into their rituals and into their heritage. They put it all in their own letters. They call one specific place their patria. That place functions as their homeland. So Spain is not merely where the Sephardim once lived or came through or traveled or any of that. It is their source land that they continue to claim in word, law, and culture. They said it themselves that is their homeland. And Spain, that whole Iberian Peninsula, that whole Portugal, doesn't matter. None of those places are Palestine.
right. Right.
Hi, Adrian. Thanks for being here. Now, somebody might push back when I say Spain is their homeland because Spain wasn't necessarily Spain, right? It's this whole area. The Sephardim is, it's a whole area. So unlike Ashkenazim, who their ethnogenesis is anchored in this specific European zone, the Sephardim are part of this Mediterranean Jewish continuum. So it's sort of like how the Ashkenazim are from the Ukrainian steppe era, and Kiev's kind of the capital. These Sephardim are sort of spread out across this Mediterranean region, mostly collecting in what we call Spain. So
Yeah.
Spain kind of, even though it's a country, that's kind of their capital. So Spain is like the heartland within their circuit, right? The heartland, the heart of the motherland. So what do we think? Do you think, Adrian, that we made the case that the Sephardim's homeland is Spain and not Israel?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Certainly.
Okay.
It's
So
there's just so many things going on at that time. While you were just speaking, I was looking at um, when was Spain like officially established, and the idea of a unified Spain happened. Some historians say um, when the marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella the First of Castile. or married.
Now, interestingly, Aragon is from what we call now Great Britain, and that is the
Germanic tribes.
Germanic invaders that came into Britain
Right.
and took over from the ancient, or not took over, but um, took sovereignty from the ancient Brittonic people. So that's where Aragon is from. So it's sort of like these are two huge houses
Yeah.
that were put together.
Well, and isn't it interesting that Hitler took, some of his influence for, his thought process from the limpieza de sangre that comes out of Spain.
Right. And that is tied to that blue blood belief system, right?
Exactly.
Which is all the Goths and that royalty. So we see how it's all connected together. All right. So some key points I want people to take with them. The Neanderthals evolved in Europe, right? If you don't remember anything else, remember that. And they are tied to two specific Jewish lineages. Thank you so much, Walt. The late for class tags. I appreciate you so much. That's very sweet. That is very sweet. So, key takeaways. Neanderthals involved in Europe. Those Neanderthals that evolved in Europe, while they are tied to a couple other people, they are tied to two specific Jewish lineages, the Ashkenazim and the Sephardic. Their range extended from Western Europe, which is Spain, France, and Germany, which is exactly where the Goths were, by the way. Then the Goths had all the Neanderthal DNA. And they went through Eastern Europe and into Western and Central Asia, reaching as far as Siberia and the Middle East. Those are the key points to remember what we've been talking about. Because the other thing I'm going to tell you is that they're also tied to the Americas, which, Adrian just talked about the greater Americas, but they're also tied to North America. So we look at Iberia and the Iberian Peninsula, a lot of information comes out. Okay, so if we look at Iberia to Siberia, this movement from Iberia to Siberia, ancient Iberians carried maternal haplogroups. So this is genetics, right? Their haplogroups are UH and X. Okay, these are ancient Iberians. And again, we're talking Neanderthal traits, right? Haplogroup X2A. So remember, their maternal haplogroups are UH and X from Iberia. Haplogroup X2A is uniquely found in Native Americans, or what we call Native Americans, right? And its closest relatives are in Europe and Iberia. Their closest genetic relatives in their haplogroup is Europe and Iberia. So this suggests their lineage moved east across Eurasia rather than just crossing the Atlantic, right? And I'm going to talk about that. During the Upper Paleolithic era, which is 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, the Ice Age conditions allowed groups to travel along those northern routes. If they hugged that mammoth steppe belt, right, from Iberia through Ukraine and Siberia, because Ukraine always comes up, right? This is the Neanderthal homeland as well. Those populations carried both the Neanderthal admixture from Europe and traces of Denisovan, which they would have picked up in Siberia. So we see this movement of Iberia to Siberia that ends up in what we call, or is commonly known as, Native Americans. So when we look at that Siberia to Native American a little closer, we have the Bering Land Bridge. Okay, that connected Siberia and Alaska during the last glacial maximum, which is 20,000 to 11,000 years ago. Genetic evidence shows that the ancestors of what we call Native Americans lived in this Bering Land Bridge was called Beringia. So the ancestors of what we call the Native Americans lived on the land bridge for thousands of years in this, what they call a population standstill, before they ever went into the Americas. They lived on the land bridge. So they see that in the genetic standstill. So they're Y DNA haplogroups. Okay, so this is not mama's side, what we just talked about. We're going to talk about daddy's side. Now we have Q and C haplogroups in Native Americans, and both the Q and the C are Siberian. So the autosomal DNA shows West Eurasian. This is your Iberian signals. And then we get the Siberian remains. So we also found this in specific fossilized remains. So there's a human that was found, the Malta boy, in Siberia around 24,000 years ago. His genome shows that he was a mix of Western Eurasian, so the European Iberian, right, and ancient North Eurasian ancestry. So that Malta boy signal is what they call it. What they got from his genes is found in all Native Americans, what we call Native Americans, what are known as Native Americans today, proving that their ancestry comes from that west to east migration across Eurasia. So this is Iberia to North America, going through Siberia. That's what we call Native Americans are today. So they have this dual ancestry, right? They're a fusion of the East Asian Siberian ancestry via Beringia, and then the ancient West Eurasian Iberian ancestry via Malta, which is that Malta signal, right? This is why Native Americans shared DNA affinity with both Siberians and ancient Europeans, because that's where they came from.
Right.
And Iberia was the last Neanderthal refuge. Siberia is kind of their fusion zone. And then, now they're moving into, North America as their homeland. This is their path, right? And remember, they picked up a little bit of Denisovan DNA through the Asian groups, through Malta.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to do a quick side note to say what the difference is between Native, Aboriginal, and Indigenous, because they're used interchangeably and they really shouldn't. Just so it's a quick side note, Native means belonging to or originating from. So even when we say Native American, well, yeah, that's true. But you're a Native American and I'm a Native American, because it just means originating from a place. So it's kind of like somebody saying she's a native New Yorker. That's all. She originated in that place. If you're born in America, you are a Native American. So you see why I don't like them, used interchangeably. Or we can say corn is native to the Americas, right? Because it originated there. So native is just a birthplace of origin. It doesn't mean first. It never has meant first. It meant that was where they were born. Then we have the term Aboriginal, and that comes from a Latin term, ab origine, from the beginning. So this one's Aboriginal is a bit deeper, right? It's more specific than Native because it means the earliest known inhabitants of the land. Because remember, everybody except the Neanderthals are coming out of Africa. So, when people settled a virgin land territory, where humanoids had never been before, no hominids had been there, then those people who set up there, stay there, they are the first peoples. They are Aboriginal. So that's what Aboriginal means. It's the earliest known inhabitants of a land are Aboriginal. So, like in Australia, they capitalize the word Aboriginal because that is the specific people that would be like their First Nations people. So, but it also, like if you say the Aboriginal people of North Africa, that would be the Berbers
Mm,
because they predated all the Arab migration.
right.
So it's the first people, right? It's sort of like it highlights priority in that way. These people were there before colonizers, before later arrivals, right? It's an ancestral claim that's a bit more than just native, right?
Right.
So, um, normal Corey, I will answer that question in just a moment. So, indigenous, right? Which is another word used interchangeably, but indigenous means sprung from the land itself. So, and when we look at out of Africa and Neanderthals, the area that Neanderthals sprung from the land itself, being around Spain, right? In that area, they are indigenous to that area, sprung from the land itself. It has the most legal, political, and cultural weight. It's recognized in international law, right? It defines group. Um, but the thing is, when we call Native American people here in North America, when we call them indigenous, they are not indigenous because they didn't spring from the land itself. Humanity is indigenous to Africa. Do you see what I'm saying? Because that's where
Right.
it's sprung from the land, right? But Native Americans, what we call Native Americans, immigrated here. They traveled here, right? And when we look at what we know thus far, um, there is no hominid species that sprung from North America. There wasn't a hominid species that came out here. So everyone that came to North America immigrated in. They traveled in. Okay. So all hominid species originated in Africa with the exception of the Neanderthals. They sprang up somewhere else. Populations that eventually reached the Americas carried admixture from the Neanderthals, from the Denisovans, and from the Homo sapiens who came out of Africa. So by the time the Americas were invaded by the colonizers, the people um, there already embodied a blend of multiple hominid ancestries pre 1492. And so we find this in the archaeological evidence. Thank you, Jules. He's in the live tribe for this one. Thank you so much for the super chat. That's very kind of you. So before I get too far, Normal Corey said, what is the origin of the word Jewish? It's interesting in that the way the word is used today is different than the way it would have been used in, say, Jesus's time. In medieval writings, somebody was a Jew, Ju, if they were Judean, if they were from the tribe of Judah. So you would have been, so it, what we call Jewish today is what would have been called Hebrew back then. So you would have had the 12 tribes. So being a Jew would be very similar to being a Levite because you were from the tribe of Levi. Or we were looking today that Ethiopian Jews are from the tribe of Dan. So they're Danites, right? And so Jew, Ju, simply meant that you were from Judah, right? You were
Right.
Judean.
Mm-hmm.
And another interesting fact about that is that again, if you look at the Bible and you look at it as a historical writings, right? Then the apostles, when you look at the apostles, there was only one Jew from Judea, right? So in their time, there would have only been one Jew, right? And who was that? Judah Iscariot, Judas, right? So he was the only Jew that was in the apostles, because Jesus was a Nazarene. And I've had my show before that showed that Jesus was not Jewish, even what we call Jewish today. So when we look at the origin of the word Jewish, it comes from the tribe of Judah, or being from Judah. Okay. It's one of the tribes of Israel. So that's where the word came from. Now, when the tribes were lost, when they were dispersed, two tribes never got lost: the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Levi. And the tribe of Judah absorbed the tribe of Levi. They were never lost. They always stayed on top and always had power. So that's why the term Jewish became the word that it is, when it really should be Hebrew or Israelites, but more likely Hebrew, which are the descendants of Eber. So that's the origin of the word. Do you have anything to add to that, Adrian? Did I leave anything out?
No. In fact, I'm picking up some information from you. I appreciate it.
Okay, nice. Yes, the Judea. Yes, normal Corey. They're Judean. That's the area that they come from. That's what that means. So where the ish came in, it's hard to find any evidence, but we all know what the suffix ish means.
Kind of, sort of.
Right. That's what it means, kind of, sort of. But I think it's because they made it interchangeable with Hebrew. So you're Judean-like, even though you're not Judean at all, because the Ashkenazim are not in the lineage of Israel. They're not in that lineage at all, because that's Shem's. Again, if you're looking at the Bible as historical, right? That is Shem's lineage, Joseph's son, not Joseph, Noah's sons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had Japheth, Ham, Shem. Shem, right? In his lineage, we have Eber, we have Jacob, Israel, right? We have, so it is, and we end up with Judeans, right? In that line, that's one of Israel's sons. That's one of the tribes of Israel. So when you look at the Ashkenazim, they are in the line of Japheth. And it's not me saying it, right? Because in the line of Japheth, what's his grandson's name? Ashkenaz.
Ashkenaz, yeah.
Yeah, his name is Ashkenaz.
One of Gomer's sons, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and that's in Japheth's line, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Ashkenaz is Japheth's grandson or great-grandson. So
yeah, like 9 times removed. It's like
so they gave themselves that. Again, they named themselves, and that is in Japheth's line. So the Ashkenazi Jews that are of today are not even Jews. They're Jewish.
Right. Like, are you Jew? Well, maybe. I mean, sort of.
A little Jewish, a little bit on my mother's side,
Right.
So that's the origin of the word Jewish, to my knowledge, and that's off the top of my head. So back to America. There is no confirmed separate species of hominids that came about in the Americas. However, there is a site in California that is 130,000 years old that they found human tool use on mastodon bones. They didn't find the hominid remains, but they found the tools that were working on the bones. This is 130,000 years ago. I mean, this predates that 11,000 years ago, they came across the Bering Strait thing, kicks that out of the water. So it predates it by 100,000 years, right? And then we have the White Sands footprints in New Mexico, right? That's pretty far south. This is 23,000 years ago. That's evidence of humans in the Americas earlier than this sort of Clovis first of coming across the Bering Land Strait. The Bering Strait. So these are earlier arrivals. But again, we didn't, to our knowledge, they didn't find the hominid fossils, right? These are also still probably migrant people because we don't have knowledge of a species that came out of the Americas. So there really is no indigenous American. There are Native Americans and there are Aboriginal Americans. So early hominids mostly evolved in Africa's Rift Valley, other than the Neanderthals. That's the cradle of humanity. There was fluctuating climates, resources, migration corridors there. That's mostly where hominids evolved. The Americas, after Pangea, they're still moving away from Africa. So the Americas are sort of isolated by these oceans and currents and the Arctic, right? Makes them really hard to reach until later when humans started using ships, right? And when I say human.
Can I say something real quick too, Maggie?
Sure.
I think that sometimes when we think about migratory patterns of humans or hominids, we tend to try to give it this myopic view, like 11,000 years ago, in that year, a big old pile of them just came piling over all at once. These were waves of migration over thousands of years.
Oh, yeah.
Just wanted to add my 2 cents in there.
Sure. I mean, you look at what we call Native Americans, and they stayed on that frozen land bridge for thousands of years.
Yeah.
These are people who would get to a place, it's kind of nice here. They might stay there for a few generations and then go over here, and then we're going to spread out some more, and then we go over there. And
yeah. So how long did it take for Cheddar Man's people to come up from Samaria into Wales?
Oh my goodness. So we're talking, they went through Sumeria, which would have been during the time they were still worshiping Anu and the Anunnaki. They came through Sumeria. I'm sorry?
I said, Anunnaki.
Yeah. So they came through Sumeria. I mean, and that's hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? And so then so Cheddar Man, so this is when the Welsh were still black. I think he's like 13,000, 15,000 years old, fossilized. So, 80,000 years.
Right.
To move from, and they originally came from Central Africa. So to move from Central Africa.
So to go from the Congo to almost around Great Britain, 80,000 years. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to take a long time. And it's just this gradual spread. Eddie, the Twa people traveled to the US. I had not heard that, but I have heard about the Twa people in the British Isles multiple times. I've done a show on. So
shout out to St. Valentine.
Yeah. St. Patrick.
St. Patrick. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Getting rid of all the snakes in Ireland when there's never been snakes.
Right. But there are snake people.
So these early hominids were in Africa's Rift Valley, and this is where they're evolving. And so there's multiple hominid species at this time, right? There's a whole bunch of them. It isn't just Homo sapien and Homo sapien sapiens, right? By the time humans reached the Americas, Homo sapien was the dominant hominid species. So this is a very long time that it took for them to get to North America. And again, we had that genetic bottleneck of what we call Native Americans, right? They have this, it's called the founders effect, right? It's a small founding population from Beringia. They all have the Malta signal. They have the Iberian, Siberian genetics, right? So it reduced their genetic variation. We can see in their genes exactly what they are. And this is what the government calls Native Americans. There were, however, others here, possibly earlier than what we call the Native Americans. And that's what were called the Black Indians. So the Black Indians were African descended or African looking peoples in the Americas, right? And this complicates the picture, especially because we're not taught this in schools. So early descriptions of a lot of the Indians, right? The European colonists recorded tribes looking Negro-like or Black in phenotype, right? And they were classified as Indians to start. The Nipmuc, Lumbee, Black Seminoles, Washita, and Yamasee were later then reclassified as Negro, colored, or mulatto in the census rolls, despite their claims of being Indians. So the reclassification erased their identity as some of the native peoples, right? Or even the Aboriginal peoples, right? So transatlantic contact, right? There are researchers that have found this, but modern academia suppresses it. But Africans reached the Americas before Columbus, right? They had seafaring. They knew about the Saharan currents. They had all this knowledge and technology. And this is something that I said before. You know, humans coming and hominids coming out of Africa, this is 500,000 to 1,000,000 years ago.
Right.
Neanderthals came around, in a very small area 400,000 years ago. There's a few of them. We don't really see them in numbers until 20,000 years ago. And then, the white people that are mutated, the freckled people who actually descend from Black people, well, that didn't happen until like 6,000 years ago. So people in Africa were not sitting around waiting for white people to show up and teach them how to build boats. We see the pyramids, we see the structures and the civilizations. We know about Mansa Musa, and we know about Timbuktu and the Library of Alexandria. Like, they could build a boat, right? They could understand currents. It's not far-fetched to think in
Alas, I have arrived to
100,000
give you
years.
civilization, you
Yeah,
savages.
right. In 100,000 years, they could figure out a boat, right? And so the presence of what they call negroidal skeletal remains were found from 11 to 15,000 years ago in the Americas, right? This could have been pre-Beringian migration. So people from Africa, Homo sapiens from Africa, could have made it to North America pre what we call the Native Americans.
Right.
And there are certain lineages, specific lineages found among even what we call Native American groups today that show that intermixing, because they have African lineages, some African DNA in there that goes back to pre-freedmen. This is pre the after slavery, right? This is way back. So they have the Iberian, Siberian, African lineage, but it's only specific ones that would have intermixed with specific African people that would have had to have been here. So think about when I talked about the migration, right? Iberia to Siberia across to North America. They didn't go through Africa. So the only way for them to have this African DNA is if there were Africans in those areas, most likely North America, because they would have just had a boat across. Thank you, Adrian. And he says the Moors, yes. And that's a big one. I mean, even when we talk about the land of Mu, that there's a lot of evidence that supports the Moors were the remaining people from Mu. So we could do a whole show on the Moors, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of very convoluted history. I mean, especially when you go back as far back as you're going now. But I mean, even the conversations that we're not having about the expelled Sephardic people out of Judea after the destruction of the Second Temple.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the Iberian Peninsula, and having to deal with the Goths at that time until 700 and what is it 711, when the Moors come up into that area and they start to rule for 800 years.
Mm-hmm.
And this struggle between the Moors and the Visigoths until such times as the Visigoths come back in and unify Spain, and now it's Christian, and right, there's just a lot. There's a lot going on.
Adric wants us to do a Moor show. I think at some point we will. I don't think we can get away from it, especially as we transition to like the hidden Hebrews,
Right.
We're going to have to move into the Moors, maybe talk about the Tartarian Empire a little bit more if we're talking about the Moors.
I think that the Moors needs to be kind of like we've gotten up to the I think now with this conversation about Jewish peoples, we've gotten into the 1800s, 1900s. Now we're going to have to dial it back to a conversation, about the Moors, probably pre 700, and then moving up through that area and to the Iberian Peninsula after 711 CE.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was Moors on those expeditions with Columbus.
Oh yeah. And there's record of that.
Yeah.
So the reason why, we all know the reason why we don't learn about the Black Indians who may have been here even before what we consider Native Americans, right? At least at the same time, because the remains are here, right? But there's always the colonial agenda, right? Because European settlers benefited from erasing the Black Indians, right? And I've talked about it on this channel before. If Native and African peoples were related or united together, they're harder to divide, enslave, and dispossess. And reclassifying these darker Native groups as Negro or mulatto, the colonizers could strip them of their land rights and enslave them. It was approved by the government and by papal bulls, by the religious institutions, right? And at the same time, you've got Jews who are, gearing up for the transatlantic slave trade, right? So everybody was in approval of taking these Native peoples and just reclassifying them.
Well, I
So,
think that saying anything
oh, it cut out. We're not hearing you. Nope, I don't know what. And maybe it doesn't look like it muted. I'm not sure what happened, but hopefully it's something you can hold on for the next show, because I started talking about the Black Indians because our next part, which is on the 7th, we're going to talk about the missing Hebrews, which includes some enslaved people. It includes Black Indians. Yeah. Adrian says Adrian Hicks got shut down. He was talking too much.
Yeah, I was.
Oh,
I'm back.
okay, he's back. Okay, what were you saying?
Well, I was just saying that, any notion of these people not being savages completely upsets the apple cart,
Right,
right? Because, the common through line is that, these colonizers are the bringers of civilization all throughout history.
right,
I remember when I was studying for my studying architecture, I had to go through art history, and even then the through line was always some European or proto-European was the one bringing all the civilization to the land. I mean, we credit Pythagoras with bringing us harmonics and math, but
right,
he's like, yeah, no, I studied for like 30 years with those guys over there,
right,
in the big triangle houses. You know
right.
what I mean?
Those black guys.
Yeah.
I learned all this from them.
Yeah,
And
the
they're like,
brothers
no,
over there
you
hanging out in the
didn't. And
triangles,
Pythagoras is like,
right?
yeah, I did. He was proud of it. The Greeks bragged about learning in Kemet. It was amazing to them, these advanced people. This was like going to grad school, you know, but somehow it doesn't fit the narrative, right? And again, people weren't sitting around for 300, 400,000 years just waiting for white people to show them how to wipe their ass, because
Right.
the Europeans didn't know how to do that, by the way, and that's documented. Who was it that was teaching whom how to bathe, right?
Yeah.
How to wash their clothes.
Yeah. I
How
mean, we're
to,
talking about 700 CE here. The Moors moving up into the Iberian Peninsula, and what did you have going on around the time? The Black Death, and it's like, oh no, here's some soap, guys.
right. Soap, right? These are, you even talk about, the people that came over with Christopher Columbus, all these colonizers, and they're bringing rats and lice and no form of hygiene whatsoever, and they're going around rampaging, killing people and taking their lands and doing stuff. And somehow they are the ones bringing civilization to all of the savages.
Right.
It's invasion of the body snatchers.
We can go on forever with this. I already know.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so we're an hour and a half in. I think we've made our point with the Sephardics. I think it's time to move into the missing Hebrews, which Adrian is going to join me again on the 7th, which I'm excited about. And we're going to start talking about the missing Hebrews and where they are today. So thank you for being here, Adrian.
Thank you. I love being here. This is great.
All right, I'm going to show y'all a picture of my dog, but before I do, I love you, I miss you, and you're my favorite. Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together.